There are three sayings, three aphorisms that are often repeated in the Goldberg home, especially these days with my kids around, of course, the entire day, and Dina and myself taking care of them for all of their waking hours. The first, and I'm particularly proud of this one, is life is not a buffet. Life is not a buffet. And I'll give you an example when that would come up. Just earlier this week, a small anecdote. I was on for the morning shift. Dina and I split our days. One day I will work in the morning and she will be on with the kids, and then vice versa. We swap in the afternoon. So I was on in the morning with the kids, and I get them dressed, brush teeth, etc. Then we start breakfast. Now breakfast, in case you have never been to the Goldberg home or don't have a comparable setup, it's not so much a meal as it is a multi-course, several-hour event. Starts off with selecting cereal, really cereals, because we get a mixture of a few different cereals. Then we segue into this one wants cheese, this one wants this fruit, this one wants to get that fruit, then we want yogurt, then we want our milk, then we have to have our vitamins. It takes a very long time, and of course interspersed in all of that is playing and bathroom and crying and all sorts of fun things. So we get through all of that, and finally we get to the blessed moment of Zoom class, Zoom pre-K for my son. I sit them both in front of the screen, and everyone's set up. I've cleared away the plates. We've been eating and eating and eating. Now it's time. We're going to sing some songs, circle time, etc. And I see my window, a little bit of an opening to just go into my own room for a minute and just, for the first time, deal with my own needs, whatever they may be. And so I went into my room and started dealing with my own things for a moment. And then there is a knock on the door. And I said, "Yes." And the sweetest little voice called out to me of my 3-year-old Shaya, and he said, "Abba, can I have a snack?" So life is not a buffet. That's the first aphorism, the first saying that I've taken to saying quite a bit these days. The second is, I'll tell my son Moshe, in a moment perhaps when he's frustrated, I'll say, "Moshe, it's not always about Moshe." Or I'll say to my son Shaya, I will say, "It's not always about Shaya." And that's a very difficult lesson for them to internalize, because they're little kids. The Avos Rabbi Nassan tells us that until a child reaches the age of bar or bat mitzvah, they simply don't have a Yetzer Hatov. They don't have a good inclination. A child is born with the Yetzer Hara, with the bad inclination, but they don't develop a Yetzer Hatov until they reach bar mitzvah. And that's a jarring thing to hear. I think about my kids. They're the sweetest, purest beings on the planet, right? I mean, the kids, of course, are capable of doing good things. What does it mean that kids don't have a Yetzer Hatov? And I think that what it really means is that a kid is not able to see beyond themselves. They're always wrapped up in their own and immediate needs. That's what it means to not have a Yetzer Hatov. To put it in the words of Jerry Seinfeld, he said that I think for the first 10 years of my life, the only clear thought that I had was, get candy. That's it. That's all of life for a kid, knocking on my door, "Abba, can I have a snack?" And I think that framing of the Yetzer Hatov is actually a very helpful one as we turn to this week's Parsha, Parshas Emor, which talks about the laws prescribing behaviors of the Kohanim and the Kohen Gadol. We have, the Torah tells us in this week's Parsha that when it comes to a Kohen Hedjot, the regular, non-Kohen Gadol, just the regular Kohen, so there are laws that limit the degree to which he can involve himself in burial and become Tameh, Tamas Meis, right? Tameh Lameis. And for a Kohen Hedjot, the only time it's permissible to come in contact with a dead body is if it is one of his immediate relatives, part of his nuclear family, his parents, God forbid, child, a spouse, etc. But for the Kohen Gadol, that's not so. For the Kohen Gadol, we are told, the pasuk says, "V'al kol nafshos meis lo yavo la'aviv ulimo lo yitama." The Kohen Gadol is not even permitted to bury his own parents. He has to continue to perform the avoda on behalf of Klal Yisrael, kind of humming merrily along and doing his responsibilities despite the fact that he has suffered a real personal tragedy and loss and possibly even a trauma. Think about that. That's almost unimaginable. The Torah generally doesn't require our Kohanim, our religious leaders, to engage in any form of self-abnegation. Not only is, for example, a Kohen Gadol permitted to marry, the Kohen Gadol must be married. A Kohen Gadol has to be well groomed. A Kohen Gadol is well fed. The Torah doesn't ask the Kohen to completely sublimate or to deny his basic needs in the physical world. But in this respect, the Torah requires the Kohen Gadol to do something that's almost superhuman, entirely unnatural. And as the pasuk says, the reason for that is ki nezer shemen mishchas elokav alav, because the mark of God's anointing oil is upon him. Put simply, the Kohen Gadol stands for something and lives for something much bigger than himself. He represents all of Klal Yisrael, and it's never about him, even in this most personally challenging moment. And so here we kind of set up, I think what I'm trying to do is set up a full spectrum. On the one hand, you have a 3-year-old, knocking on my door, Abba, can I have a snack? No Yetzer Hatov, right? There's nothing but his own self and his own immediate needs. On the one hand, it's the get candy worldview. And on the other extreme, the other far extreme, at the very tippity top of the pyramid of moral development, you have the Kohen Gadol, whose life is so elevated, is so much larger than himself, that he's unfortunately denied even the ability to indulge in that mourning process, that cathartic process, but ultimately a personal process, and he lives for something much bigger. Most of us, of course, and fortunately, find ourselves really somewhere between those two extremes, and that's how it should be. None of us are children, and at the same time, we are not the Kohen Gadol. That's not how we should be conducting ourselves. But I think nonetheless, it's important to think a little bit about that model of the Kohen Gadol, to have that awareness for ourselves, that we're trying to move, hopefully, in that direction, that we should try to cultivate every day more and more that sense of I'm living for something bigger than myself, that it's not always about me. It's challenging, and perhaps it's challenging now more than ever, because we're all living really in our own little bubbles, and we're all experiencing our own experience, our own challenges very acutely. But it bears repeating still for all of us. It's not always about me. There's something bigger. There's a broader picture at play. And that brings me to my final. I said 3 sayings. What's the final saying? And that is, I often will tell a frustrated child of mine, Moshe or Shaya, I'll say, Moshe, we are all doing our best. And I know that that's true. These are very challenging times. And I think it's hard to live beyond our immediate anxieties and fears and needs, but hopefully with that image of the Kohen Gadol, that superhuman demand that is placed upon him, hopefully that can serve us as a little bit of an inspiration. It can remind us to keep trying to see beyond ourselves, to see the bigger picture, and hopefully our best last week will be surpassed by our best next week, and the week after that will be even better. And hopefully we can all come out of this stronger and hopefully with increased emunah and faith and better people. I wish you and your families a good Shabbos.